Ancient Egyptians and ancient Mayans were both advanced patriarchal, polytheistic societies. Egyptian women exercised more freedoms than their Mayan counterparts due partly to city-state rulings and male rulers exploiting religious icons to diminish women's value in society. I'll be discussing a few topics in a compare-contrast format on both civilizations. First, we will discuss gender roles, ideals, and relationships with the opposite sex. Second, we will discuss their social and economic structures. Lastly, we will discuss their religious and ethical beliefs. Let's get started. Women were free to live as they pleased in ancient Egypt. They could sue in court, control land, control finances, free slaves, divorce, etc. Women in the Mayan civilization saw their rights erode as their society became more complex. Women in Mayan civilization were not afforded the freedoms given to Egyptian women. Across history, we've seen civilizations adjust their views towards women as they grew in complexity, size, and popularity. As the Mayan Empire grew, Mayan elites made themselves into religious figures, and their religious ideas played a key role in the start of Maya social inequality, political centralization, and eventual state authority. A direct result of state leaders claiming religious figure status, women were anticipated to stay inside and bear offspring. Prior to this, women were expected to tend to livestock. At a young age, Maya women were trained to manage households, though some worked outside the home as midwives, market vendors, and matchmakers. Women did not have the legal right to inherit property. They could, however, inherit debt and slave status. The Mayans rose just after Egypt fell. 3,000 years before the Mayans arrived in central Mexico, on the other side of the world, the earliest Egyptian historical records are dated. The women in Egypt had, fairly consistently through their history, the same rights as men. Their rights extended all over their law. We know their women could buy and sell land, property, portable goods, slaves, animals, livestock, money, etc. without the permission of a male escort. She could administer all of her property independently and according to her free will. She could conclude any kind of legal settlement. Both the Egyptian and Mayan cultures utilized tattoos to symbolize life events, milestones, etc. Early Mayan men and women used tattoos to symbolize marriage ceremonies, while Egyptian women used them as adornments. Egyptian men did not tattoo themselves, or, at least no evidence has yet come forth to disprove this. Mayan women tattooed themselves much more often than their male counterparts. They would tattoo delicate designs on the upper parts of their bodies. Arms, necks, but never their breasts. Men wouldn't be tattooed until they were married. Once wed, he would have parts of his face tattooed and sometimes parts of his torso tattooed as well. These tattoos were symbolic and less decorative. A common denominator between both civilizations is that women adorned themselves with delicate tattoos. Egyptian women would also have their necks, arms, torsos, and sometimes legs tattooed as art. Currently, there is no artistic or physical evidence that men were tattooed. Because all evidence, mummified remains, dynastic figurines, tomb scenes, suggests women were the only ones tattooed suggests gendered specific, exclusive practices on body modifications. Mayan and Egyptian civilizations ran under a hierarchy system. During the Classic period, the Maya lived in independent city-states. Within each state, Mayan society was, theoretically speaking, structured like a pyramid. The ruler of each city-state was at the top of the social pyramid. The rest of Mayan society was organized in a series of layers below him. A quick overview of their Mayan hierarchy is as follows. Halic eunuch. This was a hereditary position. It was passed down from father to son only. He is at the top of the hierarchy and has almost absolute control. Under Halic eunuch is the Batabs. Hereditary positions were initially selected by nobles. They oversaw day-to-day operations and ensured laws were enforced. Under them would be the priesthood. Priesthood also included astronomers and mathematicians. Next were the pipams, or merchants, traders. Lastly, at the bottom of the pyramid, are the peasants. The farmers, weavers, and textile makers. The Egyptians also followed a hierarchy system. Their one pharaoh was the absolute ruler of the land. Social mobility was not encouraged, as it was thought that the gods had decreed the most perfect social order which was in keeping with the central value of the culture, ma'ah, harmony and balance. Ma'ah was the universal law which allowed the world to function as it should, and the social hierarchy of ancient Egypt was thought to reflect this principle. A brief overview of the Egyptian hierarchy is as follows. The pharaoh sat atop the pyramid. Revered by his people as a living god, he ruled all of Egypt. Under him would be their vizier. The vizier oversaw appointments for the pharaoh, code of conduct, relationships and interfaces with other officials. Second in authority only to the pharaoh. Next would be the priests and nobles. The priesthood was responsible for ensuring that the earth and heavens remained as the gods created them. Priests performed rituals daily in their respective temples. Egyptian nobles below the royal family consisted of artisans and workers. Next are the craftsmen, scribes, furniture makers, artists, etc. They were revered in their community for tracking their history and creating adornments for their homes. Soldiers were also in this group, though pending rank and/or bloodline, they may rank higher. Lastly, at the bottom of the pyramid, are the farmers and slaves. Ancient Egypt had a centralized government that followed the pharaoh. Ancient Maya had no central government, instead, having city-states with their own ruling families. Unlike the Egyptians, the Maya had no central controlling government. Rather, each Maya city-state had its own individual ruling family that controlled the city and surrounding rural area. Some city-states were larger and controlled other smaller city-states, ruling them indirectly but taking tribute from the smaller polity. Each king was in control of the city-state's finances. Each city had a specialty they developed and would use for trade. The ancient cities of Koba and Chichen Itza enjoyed abundant access to salt which they used for seasoning, food preservation, etc. Salt was a major source of income for the Mayans. They also produced and traded obsidian tools, ceramics, fish, and cotton cloth. Artists would carve jade and trade them along with the previously mentioned items for goods such as turquoise, embroidered cloth, amber, and seashells. Scholars have found few government records from before the Old Kingdom period. Evidence shows that Egypt was a united kingdom with a single ruler, which indicates that the first pharaohs must have set up a form of central government and established an economic system. Before the Old Kingdom, Egyptian economy was based on a barter system. Meaning, early Egyptians paid taxes, with crops, livestock, gems, etc. The government would then, in return, provide basic public services and store food. Moving into the Old Kingdom, we witness their government adapt to a centralized style. The pharaoh had to organize large workforces and pay them somehow. By selecting relatives and people close to the pharaoh and appointing them positions in their government, he could guarantee strong allyship and better delegate tasks.
Government positions were hereditary, and by the end of the Old Kingdom, some nomarchs were ruling their districts, without the oversight of the pharaoh. The Middle Kingdom saw the addition of additional officials to have a better system of checks and balances. Tasks were delegated further to more specialized officials. The Middle Kingdom worked to limit the power of the nomarchs by appointing additional officials to oversee their works. Taxes were based on assessments of cultivable land and flooding of the Nile. Later in the New Kingdom, pharaohs are still working to minimize the power of the various nomarchs that still exist. Land area was decreased, and due to this, armies were officially built and trained, ready to respond to the nomads with force if they planned to revolt. Both the Egyptians and Mayans were polytheistic societies. The ancient Egyptians recognized and served some 2,000 different deities. As their gods were integral in every aspect of day-to-day life, it's understanding to have so many come to fruition. Some of these deities' names are well known: Isis, Osiris, Horus, Amun, Ra, Hathor, Bastet, Thoth, Anubis, and Ptah, while many others less so. Mayans had at least 250 deities that we know of that were worshipped. Thanks to Bishop Diego de Landa for burning all Mayan records, we cannot be certain exactly how many deities were truly worshipped. The majority of Mayan history and culture was lost to these fires. A few works did survive, such as the Quiche Mayan religious text, the Popol Vuh. A similarity between the two is they both worshipped an all-power and mighty sun god. The Egyptians worshipped Ra. Ra was a central god of the Egyptian pantheon. Ra was one of, if not the most served god in Egypt. Ra represents our sun, warmth, light, and creation. Ra himself represented every god, while every god illustrated characteristics of Ra. The Mayan sun god is Kinich Ahau, or Aha-Kin. Kinich Ahau was revered as one of the most mighty of their gods. Rituals and human sacrifices were done in his honor. Both societies had a concept of an afterlife and used gods to lay the law on the best pathway to an eternal afterlife. Both Mayan and Egyptian civilizations participated in human ritual sacrifice. The Egyptians practiced retainer sacrifices while the Mayans practiced propitiatory human sacrifice. The Egyptians killed to take partners to the afterlife, while Mayans did so to appease their gods. The Egyptians only practiced ritual sacrifices that we know of during the pre-dynastic period and the First Dynasty. The practice appears to have been discarded once the royal cemetery of Saqqara was built. Based on the artifacts known, the majority of kings during the First Dynasty selected members of their family and staff to be buried with. It was a belief amongst Egyptians that the afterlife mirrored the living world. Thus, when a king passed on, he required his personnel to accompany him. The selected people would be sacrificed and entombed with the king. During the Old Kingdom, we saw the custom of making ushabtis come about. These human-like figures were believed to come to life and serve the person they were buried with in the afterlife. The Mayans were more favorable of the use of human sacrifice. A propitiatory human sacrifice is when a human being is ritually sacrificed to a specific deity to curry favor with that deity, either to appease the deity's wrath or to win the deity's support for a specific endeavor. Mayans did not regard the gods as being these loving entities that were to care for us. Instead, their gods could either be very helpful or extremely dangerous, pending how they were treated by the people. Mayan priests would collect the fittest, healthiest, most attractive people to sacrifice. Only the best for their god. Both societies have similarities and differences, despite having survived in completely different periods. The Egyptians appear more advanced when in regards to women's rights than many civilizations today. Both have impacted pop culture, influenced media, and have mythologies practiced today. We are still solving the mysteries of these civilizations, but enjoy comparing and contrasting information we do know. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video.